At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farm. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious races, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
So think about it. King came and he said that we've integrated into a burning house. This was around the late 60s, right? Automatically, right away after that, we got into this trend of consumerism that never slowed down, right? In the 70s, you had the pimps, the players, you know what I'm saying? In the 80s, you had the hustlers. And that shit was about acquiring what white folks have. I want to have the right to buy what white folks got.
I'd like to start out with a quote by Malcolm X. He says, "You cannot integrate bananas with scattered leaves. They don't work. They're not supposed to work."
Lions hang out with lions, tigers hang out with tigers, elephants hang out with elephants, giraffes with giraffes. Why would you, as the original man, want to hang out with anything other than yourself?
Our spirit is different, our connection to the universe is different, and when this happens, either one of you are compromised.
What integration did was reinforce the Negro mentality that the slave master instilled in us.
Integration, when those doors and those channels were open for people to now do business other than how we were traditionally doing business. So your ice ain't cold enough no more. Your banks wasn't cool enough.
The same way that we were on the plantations and we were the veins of this country, we have become the corporate slaves in the veins of corporate America. Nothing has changed. What power has come out of that?
Every other ethnic group that comes to this country, they don't try to integrate. The only ones that try to integrate into this country is the black man and woman.
To integrate means to combine to something else, you know? And people are always thinking about us integrating to the European. So when you talk about in that context, yeah, it did make us a slave. And anybody who says otherwise or think otherwise, they're slaves, you know what I mean, who have assimilated to further their successes.
My father told me that they went downtown with picket signs and came back with jobs.
We bought lock, stock, and barrel into the integration movement because we thinking that if we can be more like white people and get more accepted by white people, mainstream society, that our life would be better. When in actuality, all it really did was make our lives worse.
The slave master's never going to consider you an equal.
You can't expect for a slaveholder to educate a slave properly. Like the Ashkenazi Jews are not sending their children to German schools to be educated because they know that the Germans are not going to properly educate their children because the Germans conspire against their own demise.
Brown versus the Board of Education, the lawyers for the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, argued and won a Supreme Court decision which stated that segregation in public schools was in fact illegal. It was a 7-year-old girl from Topeka, Kansas, who helped overturn the decision that kept black and white children from attending the same schools.
So, everything you was given was a privilege. You weren't given your rights. He can't give you your rights. Your rights are natural.
Every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate. And we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believed that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other so-called judicial bodies were for real when they talked about integration, we would integrate. And knowing that the law was on our side, and any effort we made to demonstrate toward integration, why, we would know the law should be on our side, if it's the law of the land. If it is the law of the land, then the demonstrators are within the law, and the discriminators are against the law. But to show you the hypocrisy of the law, when Negroes demonstrate for integration, instead of arresting the discriminators, the law arrests the demonstrators. So this is a foolish move on the part of Negroes. And when you foolishly get yourself involved with an enemy, then whatever comes upon you, that's your business. As Muslims, we believe that separation is the best way and the only sensible way, not integration.
You still think in terms like a slave today. He tell you what time to get up. He tell you what time to come to work. He tell you when you can eat lunch. He even is telling you right now what you should eat and what you should not eat. Who you should date, who you should not date. How long you should stay in the house. He's programming you right now. It's very instant. By your computer, your TV, your cable, your cell phone, you're being programmed. You're still a slave. He just changed the name from plantation to work site, from slave master to employer. But it's still the same game.
Instead of allowing us to be independent socially, politically, and economically, what integration did was make us dependent socially, economically, and politically.
Unfortunately, when you're in a system that is dominated by white male domination, the compromise will be enslavement on your part.
So by integrating amongst, you know, the various different nations, particularly the Persian nations of Europe, that's the destruction for our people. So, you know, once you begin to do that, you know, you lose your identity, you lose a self-growth, and you lose who you are.
So if we analyze history, the Haitian Revolution, all these, wherever integration came in, that was the downfall of that society.
Men who are white, men who are black, must and will now join together, as never in the past, to let all the forces of divisiveness know that America shall not be ruled by the bullet, but only by the ballot of free and of just men.
Based on where we're at now, and based on where we were at that time as well, yeah, I do feel like it has definitely made us better slaves. It has completely created an illusion of inclusion.
Historically speaking, if you look at after post-slavery, after Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, primarily our people were primarily Republican. And you had something called the Freedmen's Bureau that came out of the proclamations and the 13th Amendment, the 20 sections. And with the Freedmen's Bureau, you had the rise and the creation of a lot of quote-unquote black colleges, a lot of businesses came out of that particular legislation. And you also had what was called the Black Wall Street. Now, if you look at the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, there were also Black Wall Streets all throughout the country, all throughout the nation, where we had our own banks, our own schools, we were growing our own food. Even right here in Brooklyn, in the historical Weeksville community, where I grew up at, where you had the indigenous population, the Lineal Lenape people, and out of that came the Weeksville community. They had their own schools, they had a home for the elderly, they had their own newspaper. We were doing for self. So we were actually doing better when we were separated.
This community and I myself have favored segregation all down through the years. Back when this lawsuit was filed in 1950, we did everything we could to maintain segregation by trying to provide the Negro students with good, equal, but separate facilities. And that was the way the community felt, and that's the way the community wanted it. And that was the editorial policy of this newspaper.
The federal judge in this section of Tennessee in 1951 and now is Robert L. Taylor of Knoxville.
The Anderson County school case was before my court about 5 years ago. At that time, I held that the colored children were not entitled to enter the Clinton High School because they were being furnished equal but separate facilities. At that time, the equal but separate facility doctrine was the law.
The Negroes appealed Judge Taylor's decision, and when the Supreme Court decision of May 1954 ruled against segregation, Judge Taylor's ruling was reversed.
You have no control over your children since you've integrated. You have no control over yourself since you've integrated. You're less business-minded now than the slave was.
When we had our own businesses, we weren't dependent on the corporate bankers. We weren't dependent on Rome for us to have peace and prosperity. We were providing jobs for our own people.
The slave knew how to make his own money, make his own business, set up his own town, and franchise his own self and his own people. It took 3 years for $1 to leave Wall Street.
But once integration came about, even after the bombing of the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, we built a lot of our cities and our businesses, but what happened was when integration came into play, a lot of our people began to patronize in other ethnic groups' businesses, and a lot of our businesses went bankrupt.
So the mentality of going to work for somebody who was hosing you down and sicking dogs on you a few weeks ago is insanity, to say the least.
A lot of people talk about Tulsa and the fact that Tulsa was burnt down. You know, very rarely do they mention that Tulsa was built back up within 5 years. Within 5 years, the Tulsa resurgence happened. What sunk Tulsa was integration.
Right now, look at us. Go into any neighborhood where we at to see what we own.
You don't live in a community. A community is where you run your cops, your education, your banks, your everything. We live in a neighborhood. What you do with a hood, you put it over your face when you're trying to hide something.
Civil rights movement, integration movement, in my estimation, was a tactic by mainstream America to get control of the black dollar.
We have a $1 trillion buying power currently as a nation. Our buying power is in the trillions, and as a nation, we don't own anything.
I want to have the right to buy what white folks got, was what powered the whole hustle to what we at right now. You know what I'm saying? While we here on 125th, and this is the corridor of business of the United States, of the country for that matter, of the world. It's not because they up here running to get quote unquote shit that black people produce. It's because they want what the European has.
They made it out to be segregation against integration. As for me, I'm like 95%, I'd say, of the people here in Anderson County. I am against integration. Of course, we believe in Negro having equal rights, equal education, and equal facilities, but we think they should have them in their own place.
Before the civil rights movement and the integration movement came about, black people were more, not totally independent, but they had an independent spirit. They were striving to build their own economics, be in control of their own economics. Once the integration movement came on, we were tricked.
Before integration, we were working with each other, empowering each other financially, being able to develop and grow in ways that you cannot do without financial support. The money stayed within the community.
The slave knew to change his name and get off the plantation. Today, you love what he called you, and you refuse to get off the plantation, even if I promise to give you the money to make your own job. This is the reality of the state of mind that we're in as a people. Because you're still being programmed. Instead of programming yourself, you allow someone else to program you in the name of education.
We're not confident in our power base, so we're looking for them for help. And at the end of the day, these are the people that put us in these situations. They're not here to help, and they shouldn't have to. We have to help ourselves. We got to figure this shit out for ourselves, and we don't have to integrate.
And that deals with the integral part of what's wrong with us as a people. We don't see that inherent power of value in ourselves. So someone is easily able to come along and be like, oh, the shit that y'all making in the hood, yeah, that's all good. Take these pennies for it. I'm gonna package it over here and I'm gonna sell it for some dollars. So that's what we're looking at. And that's what's consistent. That's what's been going on forever and a day.
See, we went from creating industry and business to asking for jobs. And that was one of the problems. Now we got to fill out an application for a job. But what happened to your father owns a hardware store and then he passes that hardware store on to you? Nowadays you see that people were saying in Fort Greene and Bed-Stuy, at one time there was Italians, there were Irish, there were Polish, there were other European groups that lived in these communities. They moved out. They have their own communities now. Guess what they're doing? They're doing economic, they're doing cooperative economics, they're doing business amongst their own. Go to Greek Point, you see the Polish. You go to different parts of Bensonhurst and Brooklyn, you see Italians doing business amongst each other. With our people in our communities, when you go to the corner store, who's in the corner store? 9 out of 10 is going to be an Arab. You're starting to even see less of the Dominican brothers in the bodegas now. Okay? So even in our own so-called communities of Bed-Stuy, East New York, we don't even have control over the bodegas and the local corner stores. You see other ethnic groups in those stores. So we totally lost the concept of nation building and doing for self. That's what we have to get back to. When you get back into that understanding and that level of consciousness, then you're going to be able to solve your own problems. You're not going to have to always have to ask for a handout from the corporate government or, you know, another group of people. Because they're taking care of their own, we're not taking care of our own. These are things that we really have to talk about, and we really have to start applying this information and put it into practice, because if we don't, it's finished.
Integration in Kemet was the downfall of the Kemetic society. We as an African people, if integration works anywhere, it's because African people are in charge. Once Europeans are in charge, then that's the end. you are enslaved mentally, physically, and spiritually.
And even when you go into the biblical accounts or the biblical records, you know, the children of Israel wasn't asked to stay amongst the Egyptians, they was asked to come out into their own promised land. They also talk about Babylon is fallen, come out of her for Babylon is fallen. And they tell you to stay with Babylon, because we begin to stay and integrate, we begin to lose our own cultural identity, because we begin to amalgamate with other cultures, and then our own culture begins to disintegrate. And you see that's happening today, that our people, the very culture that we do have, it begins to disappear. You got hip-hop. That's a culture that we developed in our own communities, and today we have no more grasp on hip-hop no more. So that alone in itself, seeing that when we develop our subculture as far as hip-hop and different things like that, we begin to lose that.
What's happening is, as hip-hop becomes more commercial, black people aren't needed, because they can do what we can do now. They can do what we can do, they don't need us. So when you see Iggy Azalea, who's now the queen of rap music, that's what Forbes magazine is saying, that's what they're saying. That Iggy Azalea is the queen of hip-hop. If the queen of hip-hop looks like that, there's no room for you.
Integration is not for us at all. It did not benefit us. Look around. You know, you got people running around with crosses on their neck.
Everybody wants to know when did we fail and why did we fail, you know what I mean, and what happened. You assimilated into a burning house like your Jesus, you know what I'm saying, your Messiah and your messenger, Martin Luther King told you.
I started the No Jesus Peace campaign. I'm against that, straight up, and I don't care, you know what I mean? You'll never see me rocking no Jesus Peace. You'll never see me rocking no cross, because I don't embrace that shit. That shit ain't about us, you know what I'm saying? Even if it matriculated from us, it still ain't about us.
We don't want no integration. We want separation and independence.
We were tricked, and I think it was definitely a trick to change our focus from solidifying a black community to weakening our black community.
Give us some of this land for ourselves and supply us for 20 years like you're supposed to. And then after that, we on our own. But we know you ain't gonna do that. Because you know what that means. We the only ones still inventing. We the only ones still creating. We the one who built your nation, and we the one who upholds your nation. So if we get away from you, you done.
They still shooting us down the street? Let's get the fuck out of here. 20 million of us, let's put our resume out to the world. You don't think another country would love to have 20 million African Americans?
You ain't gonna allow it. And we understand it.
We're like a fucking computer coming into your country. Wealth, knowledge, talent, fucking history. We're the greatest people on earth. Americans want to fuck around and start shooting at us and shit? Cool, no problem. Keep your guns, keep your constitution. Let's go unite with God. Let's go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is dope.
But it's all right, because everything's going to happen in time, on time, with time. And your time is up.
The question is, did it make us better slaves? Absolutely it made us better slaves. Because what it did was, it made us totally dependent on other ethnic groups. And we as black people are the only ethnic group that it had that effect on.
What do we make as a people that we can now package and market to the rest of the world? America does a very good job of packaging that shit and marketing it to the rest of the world. We don't. Let's talk about some things that we've done within the last 30, 50, or 60 years, right? France wants our music and our culture. Germany wants our music and our culture, right? China wants our music and our culture and things of this particular, they want our fashion and what have you. When America had a problem in the early 2000s with their image abroad, especially in the Islamic world, they put hip-hop on tour, okay? They went and got some hip-hop artists, and they like, we want to export y'all to France and to Germany and these other places, okay, to give America a good look in terms of its cultural relations. So we have products that can be properly packaged, commodified, and sold to the rest of the world, but we need what you're talking about, what you offer, and that's the business training. How do we learn to see what we have and lend value to it?
The Jewish community, I want to say that when a child becomes 13 and they have a bar mitzvah, all the family members and friends and relatives that come to that bar mitzvah, they all bring in finance for that particular child who's now considered to be a man. They having the rites of passage, right? So let's say you invite 500 people and everybody brings $500. Now this child has thousands of dollars in the bank already at the age of 13. So at 13, these children are learning economics and finance, and on top of that, 9 times out of 10, his father has a business that he's going to pass on to that son. By the time he's 19, 21, he's already has thousands of dollars in the bank to invest, and he has a business that is being passed on to him from his father.
We have the know-how to do it, you know what I'm saying? But something happened. Something happened in the 60s that changed the course of everything that people are not willing to look at. As soon as we integrated, shit started falling to pieces. And now we at where we at right now.
The Asians, they're not totally dependent on mainstream America. The Hispanics, they're not totally dependent on mainstream America. You have a large Arab influx coming into this country. They're not dependent on mainstream America. Black America is totally dependent on mainstream America for everything that we do. And I believe that integration in the civil rights movement was the catalyst that made that happen.
You saw the hidden colors, how we had our own bus companies in North Carolina. So when we integrated, we actually destroyed our economic power as a people. Because if you look at the Hasidic Jewish community in New York City, they have something called cooperative economics. When they spend their money amongst their own. They have their own trucks coming in the morning with their eggs and their milk and their own businesses. So they circulate their dollar within their own community, so it empowers them. And when you're empowered economically, you're empowered politically. If you don't have economic power, you're not going to have political power. All right? Because that's just like the Prophet Noble Ali said. Nobody respects a beggar nation. You'll just be a beggar nation, asking the quote-unquote corporate government for a handout. So the only way our people can have peace and prosperity and liberty is for us to do for self, start incorporating, having our own businesses.
So we got to begin to stick to ourselves and be ourselves. The Prophet Noble Ali said, you know, I taught you to be yourself. So you got to be ourselves. By being ourselves, you got to know yourself. And we got to begin to stick with our own and do what we got to do for ourselves. So integration is definitely a big mistake, but we separate but equal. It's not that you gotta hate the Europeans or hate other nations. It's not about that. You could, like the brother said, you could do business and commerce with other nations. There's nothing wrong with sitting down and talking with other nations and having dialogue. But when it comes to like building your own and being yourself, you gotta stick to your own and be yourself. So definitely integration is a big mistake for our people. And to this very day, we need to begin to stick to our own and be ourselves and develop our own nation. With that, I say peace.
If integration works anywhere, it's because African people are in charge. Once Europeans are in charge, then that's the end. You are enslaved mentally, physically, and spiritually. So the only way it works is when African people are in charge. But if you're in your right mind, why would you want to do that anyway?
We know that the #1 enemy on this planet to black people is the so-called white man. And the problem that we're facing today is integration. The integration that we allowed to proliferate this place from the time of Martin Luther King and so forth like that is why we're in this condition. So we're going to do a lecture on segregation versus integration. Did it kill Eric Gardner? Did it kill Mike Brown? does it lead to why we're dealing drugs at the rate that we're doing it? The black on black crime that we're committing, the abortions that we're doing. We're gonna break all of this stuff down in the thing, even with our religions, even with our cultures, even everything that we do, even like with the conscious community to some extent. When you look at the history of the conscious community, when you look at the leaders of the conscious community, everybody knows the solution is segregation, that is not integration. And of course we'll use the Bible, of course we use the scriptures, but we also show through our history that integration is what destroyed us.
I think you'll find, sir, that there will come a time when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves. Then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together. And then at that point, you'll have a situation where when you attack one black man, you are attacking all black men. And this type of black thinking will cause all black people to stick together. And this type of thinking also will bring an end to the brutality inflicted upon black people by white people. And it is the only thing that will bring an end to it. No federal court, state court, or city court will bring an end to it. It's something that the black man has to bring an end to himself.
Let's go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia's dope. Ethiopia's dope. Dope. Let's go to Ethiopia. All 20 million African Americans. Fuck this American shit. Leave these white folks here to themselves. And I guarantee you this thing will change overnight. They'll be begging you to come back. Could you imagine if 20 million African Americans put a petition out to Russia and say, yo, or better yet, you know what? Okay, oh, boom. You took the word out of my mouth. You just took it, they just opened Cuba. You know I'm going. You know I'm out of here.
It ain't for everybody. All the people ain't gonna make it because all the people don't want it. Many have come before us trying to get them all, and none of them have been able to. So we learn to get the ones that's coming, who want it, and the ones that don't want it, leave them alone. Let them do what they do, because ain't no force in this. We ain't gonna become the oppressor of our own people.
My people are not strong enough to let go of the dream that no longer provides them strength. A dream deferred with a rotten stench. My people are buckling under the weight of this dream that has become such a heavy burden that 5-year-olds literally have to have the might of Hulk Hogan to hold on and hold up this crumbling dream. We have ushered our family to a burning house in hopes of finding this dream. And we are now so deep in a house, it's virtually impossible to get out. The ceiling is collapsing and we are using our youth as shields to absorb the blunt force trauma from this collapsing beams. Buckling under pressure, eroding from exposure to the elements, weakened from within. An infrastructure that has been molested by the molars of mechanized nano termites as if they had their national convention there. You can rise from butler to president of this house. America will find a way to remind you though, you still a nigga, boy. In this house, you can rise through the ranks of being America's boy to America's dad. Primetime entertainment in the big room. America will still find a way to remind you, you still a nigga, boy. You can go from mammy of the house to first lady of the house. And America will fix her big fat mouth to remind you and your children, you still a nigga, boy. Funny thing is, this the house you built. And those unruly house guests are just...